by singing the song that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, Love Lifted Me. So if you would, please stand and join in singing Love Lifted Me. I was sinking deep in sand, far from the peaceful shore, very deep, disdain within, sinking to rise for more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry, and from the waters lifted me, now saved am I. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. All my heart to Him I give, ever to Him I cling. In His blessed presence will ever His praises sing. Love so mighty and so true, there is my soul's song. Faithful, loving service to Him belong. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. Last verse. Souls in danger, look above. Jesus completely saves. He will lift you by His love out of the angry waves. He's the master of the sea, will His will obey. He, your Savior, wants to be saved today. And love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. Amen. Thankful for God's love. Amen. You may be seated. Ken will come with our
Amen. We're going to continue worshiping this morning, and speaking about a testimony, I think that this first song that we're going to sing is a testimony of our faith. It starts off by saying, "I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me." All these worldly things that we have, they don't fill us like God can fill us. And in the bridge of this song, my favorite line is the title of the song. It says, "You turn graves into gardens." We were dead in our sin before God, but then when God came into our lives, He saved us, and He made us, our dead lives, He made them flourish. And we can bear fruit now, and that's, like a garden. And so I love this song, and I love the testimony of this song. So y'all stand and worship, please. Oh, I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures of faith are never enough. Then you came along.
turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can.
This next song, it talks about, having God to build our life on. It's called Build My Life. How worthy is God of all of our praise if He can turn a grave into a garden, He can part a sea and make it a highway. He's very worthy of every breath that we could breathe. And He gives us a love that's so strong that we can build our life on it. So y'all sing this next song with us.
You're worthy of every song we could ever sing. You're worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. You're worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you, and there is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. You're worthy of every song we could ever sing. You're worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. the promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. This is how I fight my battles. 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 It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. This is how I fight my battles. 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 So why should I fear? The evidence is here. So why should I fear? Oh, the evidence is here.
Dear God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this time to be able to come together and worship your name, God, and lift you up. God, we thank you for turning our graves into gardens and giving us that love that we can build our life on, God. God, we see the evidence all in our lives. It's there. You've proven yourself to us over and over again of how good you are to us and how much you love us and you're there for us. So as we move into the next part of the service, God, I ask that you would open the hearts of everyone in here to what you would have them to hear through this testimony, God. And that we would leave here with something with us that we can take to somebody else, God, that we can go out and we can share that. And I pray that you would protect us throughout the week as we go, and it's all over. Amen.
Cried the whole way through it because it seemed like every single song was telling my story. And knowing that I'm about to share my story, I was trying to choke back all the tears, going, not right now. We'll do this later. I was telling God that. But my name's Rachel Duvall, and it is such a privilege and an honor to be able to come here today and speak to you guys. Really just share with you what the Lord has done in my life, and the encouragement that I would find in that is knowing that, maybe it could touch your story, the story of someone you know, the story of someone in your neighborhood that, someone that you, there's in addiction, there's sisters, there's brothers, there's aunts, there's uncles, there's children, there's neighbors. And once you hear my story, I just hope that will encourage you that someone in your life that you may know, or that God may bring you across, that my story will encourage you to minister to them, that God is a God that takes the bones and brings them to life. And that's exactly what he's done in my life. So I'll just start by sharing my story with you. So I was raised in a home. Actually, let me ask, what time do you want me to be done? That way I can... Okay, that's kind of scary. I'm like... Okay, so I was raised in a home where my dad was in addiction. I would say my mom was. My mom did not go into addiction until later on in life, but my dad was in addiction. And my mom was actually kind of raised in a Leave It to Beaver kind of home in Birmingham, Alabama. And, they raised her in church, and my grandmother was one of the strongest Christians I've ever known. But when my mom's mom was diagnosed with bone cancer, my mom was 16 years old, and she slowly saw her mom's body being amputated. And, during that process, my mom would have a headache or cramps or something, and her mom would say, oh, well, just take this Lortab. It'll help with cramps. Kind of naively, about the addiction to opiates and that kind of thing. And so that kind of started her on a little bit of a journey of, okay, not only did that Lortab take the physical cramps away, but that kind of eased the physical pain or the emotional pain that I was going through, watching, experiencing my mom's death. And so after she had passed away, she went to live with my grandparents, and that is when she met my dad. And in rebellion to them, really, just in her brokenness, I mean, he was everything to her. He played guitar, he sang music and wrote poems, and he was a hippie, and he just, swooshed her away. And against my grandmother and everyone else's wishes, she married him. Well, after my oldest sister was born, my dad went out to drink one night, and when he came home, that was the first time my dad, in his drunken rage, physically abused my mom. And so that did not actually stop until 16 years later when they finally divorced. And so we were raised in a home. I praise God for it, because in a lot of ways I was able to see the contrast, with my dad in addiction and that darkness. And his dad was a preacher. And before he was a preacher, he was abusive to him and that kind of thing. So he just had this twisted view of God where he would take the word of God and he would almost use it as a weapon against us, a weapon against my mom. So he knew the word of God very, very well, but he was not saved. And it was just confusing to us in a lot of ways. We were literally taught fear God, and fear him. And so that did instill in us a little bit of, okay, healthy fear of God and healthy fear of your elders and that kind of thing. But my mom, she raised us in church. And so for this whole time, she said when they were living in Texas, when he came home and beat her for the first time, that she had some neighbors that lived in a little apartment near her house, and she asked them, hey, she I think had already had my sister, and then she was pregnant with me, and she said, hey, would you mind me going to church with you? Would you mind taking me to church? And so she started going back to church, and so she remained faithful in the church for 10 years. Probably 15 years, 14 years, something like that. But we were raised in church for about 10 or 11 years. And so my mom would go to church. She would worship God. I remember that she started working in the preschool, in the little daycare, so that we could all go to private school. And I remember before church, she would have these, like in this room, a prayer room, and they would have all these little chairs, on the floor. And I remember my mom would get down on her knees in front of these chairs, and all of us 4 little kids would get on our little knees, and we would pray, before school. And I just remember my mom worshiping God and crying out to God for my dad for so many years. And now looking back on, I did not know, all that she was going through. Now I know all that she was going through, and raising 4 kids on her own pretty much with a father, that's in addiction, never working. I think it just finally took a toll on her, where at the age of 10, when I was 10 years old, my brother, he was riding his bike, and he fell off his bike, and he broke his femur bone. And so he ended up being in a full body cast for 6 months on one couch. A few weeks after he broke his femur bone and was on one couch, I was running through the kitchen to get a towel because my cousin had spilt tea in the living room. And so me and my sister were racing. And we were both running. My dad, I remember he had just put that last piece of fried fish onto the plate. And my sister stopped running. And I was winning. I wasn't going to stop running. And I slipped on the floor where the grease had popped onto the floor, and my arm hit the skillet. And I knocked 350 degrees of hot grease all over my body. And I was a little ham back then, and the grease came all the way to here, right down. I almost lost my ear. It swelled up. I have severe scars on my shoulder. My face should have been just as scarred as my shoulder. That's where the grease hit first. But my family went across the street to the Pentecostal friends that we had across the street and asked that they prayed for my face. And you see, God completely healed it. I'm grateful for the scars. I used to not be, obviously, growing up. I was embarrassed and all that stuff. But now I just feel like they're a part of me, and I'm so grateful to God for what he's done in my life. And if this was part of the lot that came with all that he was going to do and how he was going to use me, then I'm totally fine with all the scars, and I don't mind showing them at all. But it took me a long time to get there. And so at 12 years old, my mom confronted my dad about the sexual abuse because she had left him and we all went to Birmingham without my dad. And that was the happiest time of our lives. And when we came home from school one day, his truck was parked in the driveway. And that was the worst day of my life, was seeing that my dad was home. And we still didn't have the courage, me and my older sister, to tell my mom anything that had happened to us. But when she really let him back in and we felt like there was a safe enough moment to talk to her, my older sister and I went to my mom and said, this is what Dad did when we were both 10 years old. And my little sister was about to be 10. And so she confronted him and he left. He just left us, my mom with 4 kids. And we didn't see him again for years and years later. She tried to press charges on him, and we had to go to counseling and that kind of thing, even though the charges never stuck, probably because they couldn't find him. I don't know. But so once the authority was gone from our home, that strict authority, it was almost like my mom was free for the first time because of all the abuse, and during that time, I remember it was a slow fade for my mom. She started smoking cigarettes. I remember, she was working at night, waiting tables, and she had 4 kids, almost like teenager age, young teenagers at this time. And she would work every single night because that was the only way she could really make any money, was waiting tables at night. And so she would make really good money that way, but that would put her at home gone every night and us 4 kids alone. And because my dad had left, we had to start over, and we left Arizona. We came back to Panama City, and the first place we lived was in a hotel on the beach. Now, the first step that direction, when my dad had taken us from Alabama to Arizona, where I said that was the worst day of my life when my dad's car was parked there, we were there for about 2 months until I would come home from school and our microwave was gone. The next couple of days I'd come home from school, the TV was gone. And slowly, all these things started disappearing in our house, and I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I knew it was because my dad was back. And what had happened is he started smoking crack, and he got my mom smoking it with some neighbors that lived in one of the apartments. And so when we left for Arizona, it was actually running away from everything. And we left with $75 and many books of those food stamps. And so what my dad would do is he'd take $1 of those food stamps, he'd give it to each kid. There was 4 kids. We'd go into the convenience store or whatever, and if you got like a 5-cent candy, then he got 95 cents back, and that's how he bought his beer and gas for the rest of the way. We ended up living in our car for like 3 months on this wild journey to Arizona. And that's when my dad left us, was in Arizona. We were not established. We were living with his friends, and that's when he just up and left my mom. So she came back to Panama City with us 4 kids. We went from a hotel to a trailer to housing in the projects. And then my mom ended up renting a nice house. So that was kind of that happened twice to us. My dad coming back through, us falling, her building our lives back up. And it was just this pattern that my mom had a hard time leaving the abuser and raising 4 kids on her own, all this kind of thing. But so when we were living in the projects, she was working every night, and that's when we started, sneaking boys in the window and sneaking them out before she got home, and smoking pot. And then gradually it went to harder and harder drugs. My mom and I ended up using together because as I was on my journey deeper and deeper into drugs, she was on her journey deeper and deeper into drugs as well. Whereas, my mom was such an alcoholic that every single night, literally almost every single night, I would have to pick her up off of the bathroom floor, wipe her face from all the throw up and everything. She's passed out, put her in bed, take her clothes off, put on her pajamas. And that was like my childhood, my teenage years. And so we just started using, and by the time I was 18 years old, my mom and I were using together. She kind of did the same thing with the Lortabs. She had a prescription, she hurt her back, and I said, oh, I don't feel good. Hey, try this. And that started my journey into my actual physical addiction to the drugs. And so by the age of 16, I had live-in boyfriends at 14. But by the age of 16, I had my son. By the age of 18, his father had gone to prison, and he stayed for 5 years. He was out 2 months, back in for 2 years, out for a couple more months, back in. And so really, we were just, I had no father to help raise my son. And by the age of 18, I caught drug charges and this started my me going to jail. I almost sent you my mugshot. But then I thought, no, they will never let me in their church if they saw that. It's horrendous. Like, you would not believe it. I almost sent it to you. And I only got that from working at the Bay County Jail. You can look up, they said, okay, we'll go into the system, play around with the system, and look up, whoever. I started looking at my dad and my mom, and then my brother and me, and I'm pulling up all these pictures. Well, I took a picture of my mugshot when I pulled it up, but since working at the jail, he since has deleted all that out of the system for me. But by the age, of 18, his father was in prison, and I was heavily addicted to drugs, just getting drug charges. And the thing is when we were little kids, I accepted Christ when I was like 8 years old to come into my heart. And so, but I was never discipled. I never knew how to live it. I didn't know. I remember going to church with my mom many, many times, high on drugs, and just in our heart, just, crying out to God. We just didn't know how to get out of the mess that we were in. And I remember looking at the Christians. I remember there was one girl that I was in addiction with that used to go to the clubs with me and that kind of thing, and she was in church. And I was like, wow, I was just blown away. How did she get in church? And I just kept wanting so bad to be like her. And I didn't know how to be a Christian. See, remember, I was saved, but I didn't know really what that meant. And so in my mind, I thought a Christian, you have to really know how to follow the rules, and you have to look real cute and put on preppy clothes and just be real good. And I was so far from that. I was a little street kid, we knew manners and all that because my dad really instilled those into us, but I couldn't be good. And so, but God was dealing with my heart through my whole life. I mean, he was always there with me. I had an overdose. I was driving over the Hathaway Bridge, and all I remember is pushing on the gas thinking I need to get home. That was the last thing I remember. Somehow God got me over that bridge and parked at a red light. And I was in the hospital for 6 hours in a coma. And during that time, no one came to see me because they were used to Rachel running off and staying gone for days. And so when I woke up in jail the next morning, I was let out that next day. And I was sitting in the warrants department where you kind of pick up people in the back of the jail. And an officer was sitting next to me. And he said, hey, aren't you that girl last night that almost died? And I said, yes, sir. He said, yeah, my buddy's the one that found you. He sure is glad you made it. He would have hated to do all that paperwork. And do you know that not in that moment did that change my life, but that was one of the things God used to help change my life. I got into the car with my mom, did the same drugs literally as soon as I got in the car that almost killed me the night before, and just kept going with my life. Still just trapped in the bondage of drugs, not knowing how to get out. I didn't even know rehabs existed. I had no idea what they were. In my family, that's just what we do, and people die in addiction. That's just, the way it is. And so by the age of 22, I had to stay in jail for 5 months. I'd gotten in so much trouble, they said, you got to stay here for 5 months. They put me in a little rehab inside the jail. And while I was there, I turned to the Lord. And I just started reading the Bible and going to all the little church services, and being in the Bay County Jail and people coming to do church in there is literally what changed my life. Was God met me inside that jail. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was free, but I was in jail. And I was mourning that my mom was out of jail in bondage. And you could never, it's hard to understand that. But the freedom that I needed so bad was not my physical existence. It was my spiritual existence in my heart. And when I met Jesus Christ again in jail, it literally set my soul free. And I just began to believe in his word. I just believed, the things I would read in Psalms, that he would restore my life and that he loves me, and all these things, that I would read. And I would just cling to him like he was everything. Well, what happened was when I got out of jail, I only knew one kind of sober person that I could go stay with, and it was my son's grandmother. And she still had marijuana under the bed and a bottle of Xanaxes on her table. Well, those were never really my drug of choices. So I thought, okay, I'm good. And she was functioning. She was angry a lot. And so she just really, I just was very discouraged. So I started going to my mom's and seeing my brother and my sisters and stuff. And they were heavy in addiction. And it was so bad that when I would walk in the room, I would see death all over their faces. Because I was clean and I was walking with God, and it was just dark. And I remember it would be so overwhelming that I would go into the bathroom and I would get on my knees and I would turn off the lights and I would just pray. And then I'd come back out kind of regaining strength. And I guess I did that enough to desensitize myself a little bit to that darkness again. And it took me years to realize why I ended up relapsing again, because I was going to church and I was reading my Bible, and I thought that that's all that you needed. And what I didn't realize was you have to, Genesis 12:1 is one of my stories for addiction, and really we can all apply it to our lives, is that God called Abraham to come out from among your people and come follow after me. I'm going to take you to a place which you'll know it's not, but it's going to be good. But he told him, I want you to come out, but you have to leave all these things behind. And I think the first time I went to jail, what happened was I followed after God with all my heart, but I didn't do any of the leaving. I wanted to bring my mom and my dad and, everybody with me, because I just missed them. We were so close. And some of the old friends, and God was like, no. Because remember, Genesis, when Abraham went after God, he took Lot with him, and he was not supposed to. And Lot ended up causing him a lot of trouble. So these things that God says, come out from among them, it wasn't that God didn't want me to have a family. God was actually going to bring me to a church where I found a church family, and then slowly God would bring my mom and my brother and my sisters and everybody back. So I'm going to share that with you in just a minute. So so I ran from the police for 2 years. I started being an IV drug user. And I was running from God hard, because at this point I knew God. And God had begun to reveal himself to me in his truth. And so now I'm just running from God. And how many of you know you really can't run from God? That does not work. And so I ended myself up back in jail with 4 new felony charges. And this time I was in there for another 5 months. And I was supposed to go to prison. But the Lord had mercy on me. And actually, when I went to jail, I found out I was 3 months pregnant with my daughter. And I was IV drug user. I had no idea. And God spared my child. And I ended up having a healthy baby girl. And I'm so grateful to God. But so while I was in jail, this is what God had spoken to my heart. He said, Rachel, if you look like, because I would ask God, like, okay, how do I not come back? Like, I wanted to never go to jail again. And God said, if you look like everyone else, if you're doing the same things everybody else is doing, you're going to come back. Your life has to be different. You have to pull apart from, there's a separation process that God had to do in my heart, where I had to pull away from all the people in jail and, the little social settings, even in a jail. And I was very insecure. And so that separation process was really hard for me. Growing up, I always felt like this little bitty girl in this great big world. Kind of like the Israelites when they were looking into the promised land. And they're like, we can't go in there, it's giants. That's the way I felt. I felt like the world was full of giants, and I was just this little bitty grasshopper, and I had no idea how to take it on. And so I just would run back to Egypt, run back to drugs, because it seemed easier than conquering this new land that I really didn't know how to do it or what to do. And so I ended up while I was in jail, I started praying so hard for my mom. God, please let my mom come to jail. Please let my mom come to jail and be free like me. 3 times in that 5 months I was in there, my mom came to jail. And I ended up going to the AWARE program for mothers with infants. And so I was able to take my baby with me. And a couple of months later, my mom, unbeknown to me, shows up as a client at the same rehab. What happened was she got arrested. She got court ordered just like I did. So now my mom, me, and my baby are in rehab together. You would say that is terrible. It was actually the best thing that ever happened to us. We were all sober for the first time in a very long time. And me and my mom got together and we started praying for my sisters and my brother. And so I ended up getting out first. My mom got out after me. And remember, God said, leave my family. See, God never wanted me to not have my family. He just needed me to do it on his terms. And so what he did was I had my own little apartment. I got established. God brought my mom, and she stayed with me. I helped her get on her feet. Then she moved out to her own apartment. My younger sister, Roxanne, she ended up getting arrested too. Because remember, me and my mom were praying for my brother and my sisters. And she ended up getting arrested. She went to the same exact rehab that we were court-ordered to. Then she gets out. She comes to live with me. I help her get on her feet, and she gets her own place. Then my older sister, Melissa, she ends up going to jail, and then she gets a rehab program. When she gets out of rehab, she comes to live with me. She goes back and she lives with her husband. They get on their feet. Then my younger brother, about a year later, he gets arrested, goes to jail, gets out, comes to live with me. He gets on his feet, and he ended up marrying a girl that I was in rehab with. And this girl, she knew nothing about God, and she did not come to rehab to find God. That's what she would tell me. But she would just let me witness to her and just share my faith or whatever verses, I was reading or whatever. I don't know. I had to share it with somebody. And she ended up, after we got out of rehab, she went kind of on a different adventure, And she came back to my house one day, and we were talking about the Lord, and she said, I said, well, do you want to be saved? And she said, yes, and I led her to the Lord on my couch. Granted, when I got out of rehab, I was still on house arrest, okay? I was on house arrest, and I was working at the Holiday Inn in sales. And let's see, I want to kind of skip forward a little bit. My dad ended up actually coming to live with me for a little while, and he would not stop drinking. He was just being vulgar, and so, I sent him away, and I didn't see him for years later. But while I was in rehab, they wanted us to write our obituary. And you could write the obituary any way you wanted your life to be, like however you wanted to end up. And so I'm thinking, okay, if I can dream and I can just write anything I want to. I said, okay, Rachel, got clean. Rachel Hamrick was my maiden name. Rachel Hamrick got clean at the age of 24 and turned her life over to God. And she ended up, when she was 32, opening a faith-based recovery program for families, and just this whole thing, and died at the age of 99, just because, 100, I don't want to be prideful, So, 99, died at the age of 99, and that was my dream, and I just tucked that little, dream away into the back of my mind, never thinking anything like that could ever happen to me. It was just a dream. It was just something, if you had the perfect life, what would you ever want to do with it? And that's what I had said. And fast forward the tape, and there's a lot in that 7 years that God, I was single. I had my son. He was 7 when I got sober, and my daughter was a little baby. And now my daughter has been raised in church for these 16 years. Matter of fact, she's at church this morning in our city, and we're here. She plays in the band, and she's never experienced addiction except for what, she's seen in her own dad's life, which her dad is currently incarcerated. And then my son's father, once I met Scott, I was single for 7 years, no dating, no kissing, nothing for 7 years. And then I met Scott at church. And God brought us together and our two families together. And about 4 months after we were married, my son's father had passed away from a drug overdose. We were one of the first people on the scene, with all that mess. That gap between in that 7 years, God showed himself so faithful to me through, he literally became my everything. He was the father to the fatherless, so therefore I needed him to be the father to my children. He needed to provide because I was making $8.25 an hour with 2 little kids, and I was paying my tithe, and I'm telling you, I never needed anything. Even a lot of the wants, God took care of for me. I'm telling you, he blessed my life, and he just always took care of us. And so Scott and I got married, and I had an additional 2 girls come into my family with Scott, Brittany and Mackenzie. My son's name is Jacob, and I have Brianna. So Brianna's now 16, Mackenzie's 19, Jacob's 24, and Brittany's 26. Okay, so that's our little family now. But while I was working at Holiday Inn, so God, 2 weeks out of rehab, the Lord led me to this Baptist church. Now, I grew up Pentecostal, so I was actually going to a Pentecostal church. And someone said, hey, do you want to go to the support group meeting for drug and alcohol addiction for women and men who struggle with drug and alcohol addiction? And it's faith-based. And I was like, oh, yeah. And so I started going to this meeting. And at this meeting at First Baptist Church in Panama City, I met a guy named Rick McClung and his wife, Vicki. And I don't know what all Rick said that day, but all I remember him saying was, I have 19 years clean. And I just was like, whoa, I had no idea anyone, could have ever stayed clean that long. And so I started attending church. And I'm telling you, when I first started coming to church, I was still on house arrest. Okay. I was a disaster. Literally, the Lord was doing a major work in my life, but there was a lot of things that I had to learn how to do. I remember going to church, and, I just wore the attire I'm just used to wearing. And I remember Vicki, his wife, would just very politely and very gracefully go, pull your shirt up. And I would, pull my shirt up. And I remember she did that so many times in one day that I looked at her and I was so mad, and I went like that with a little attitude. Okay, I'll pull my. She didn't understand. That was the best I had, But the Lord taught me through her how to be a Christian woman, and He taught me through my boss at Holiday Inn how to be a businesswoman. And God just was molding me and shaping me into who I am today. And I'll be continuing to be shaped and molded into the image of Jesus Christ until the day we die and we get to see Him. But so as I was working at Holiday Inn for 10 years, I was actually brought on staff at First Baptist Church of Panama City a couple of years after I gotten clean. They wanted me to start overseeing the women in this ministry. And so they would let me kind of team teach a lot. And so eventually I ended up being the primary teacher to this support group. Well, 13 years ago, we started going into the Bay County Jail with this ministry, the support group. And our ministry just began to grow and grow and grow and grow. And then about 10 years ago, we started going into Gadsden Prison for women. And so we would take this meeting in. We teach probably 150 inmates. And really, I say these meetings, it is a support group meeting for drug and alcohol addiction, but it's the Bible. That's what it is. And that's what worked in my life. And so one afternoon, I was teaching this class, and these little ladies come in. And they're from this program called Bethel Village. And I had shared my testimony there with them several times, and we weren't really allowed to minister there. The lady who was the director, she kind of had her own church, and they were kind of doing their own thing. But we would pray, Lord, give us an open door into Bethel Village where we can minister to these girls. And these little girls come sitting in, and they sit through my class, and at the end they said, Rachel, would you consider coming and applying for the job at Bethel Village? It would hold up to about 40 women, and we had a homeless shelter for women and children, and we had a faith-based recovery program. And I was like, oh my goodness. I've worked at Holiday Inn for 10 years, but I had walked these women through addiction over that 10 years, just through my church and going into the jails and stuff. And I remember working at Holiday Inn and going, God, what am I doing here? I want to minister to girls. I got like 20 write-ups in that 10 years I was there for being on the phone too much. And the only people I were talking to were the girls I was ministering to. I just couldn't stop, I've since had to learn boundaries and all that, but I just wanted to minister to girls full time, and I kept asking God, please allow me to go into full time ministry. Well, my little pea brain, the only kind of ministry I was thinking was these support groups and that kind of thing. I had no idea that 10 years I was working in that office setting, that God was teaching me for the next step of life that He was bringing me into, which was so far beyond my abilities that God really helped me just to find my way by being completely 100% dependent upon Him. And so I took the job as the director of Bethel Village Recovery and Homeless Shelter. And I can tell you this for your encouragement. Before every large thing God had done in my life, before the next step of any ministry at all, I went through a fire. I went through hell on earth, I guess you could say, if you want me to be honest. And, something happening with me and Scott, not us, it was nothing we did, it was sin from other people that affected our lives so greatly that it was hard. God put us through a fire. He made us so dependent upon Him where we were just on our knees crying out to God, begging Him for direction and for help. And it was the hardest thing I'd ever gone through in my life. Over all my childhood, through addiction, jail, all those things, this was literally the hardest thing I'd ever gone through in my life as a born-again Christian living for the Lord. And as soon as we still have not come out of the situation, but what happened during that fire experience, those trials, was God changed me, and God changed Scott. And so the situation really still hasn't changed a whole lot. We've changed. And God has helped us to cope with all these things. So that happened before I got the job at Bethel. And then 10 years later, a new CEO takes over the program. And I don't know if he's a Christian. If he is, he's a very, very baby Christian. And he took the ministry a totally different direction. We had a 12-month faith-based recovery program where we would go into the jails and help save girls from going to prison. We would go to court with them and ask the judge, would you please let us have her? And we would fight for them. And those girls that were on their way to prison, the nobodies that were just cast away, that everybody forgot, that no one thought was any help for them, those girls, when they came to our program, if they graduated, they had an 85% success rate. And really, the thing that we did was, the thing that I'm doing at Humble House now is teach the Bible. And so we had a high success rate, and we had, at this time when he stepped in, we had the most fruit we'd ever seen. It was good. Life was good. And the ministry was fruitful, and we were just, we kind of knew even, this is way too good. We know that, I don't want to say we braced ourselves for negativity, but we saw the hand of God, and usually when the hand of God is at work, the enemy starts to be at work too. And we could see him rearing up his little head. And our ministry started going a different direction. We had a free program. The program went from 12 months. He wanted to change it to 3 months. He wanted to charge girls $1,000 a month. And some people can afford that, but in Panama City, most people, probably like your community, cannot afford that. And so I'm like, oh my goodness, there were so many girls that we wanted to help. We just couldn't. They didn't have the money. And so even the shelter, the price was raised on it, an extreme amount. And so my heart just started going a different direction. So me and my staff, the girls that worked for me, we would fast and pray on Wednesdays, and we would just ask God, please give us direction. And I felt God begin to impress upon me, you need to get your 501c3. Just in case God ever did anything, get your 501c3. So while I was still at Bethel, I started getting my 501c3, still not knowing what God was going to do. I just felt like, really, my heart was not, open your own recovery program. My heart was, we need to save these girls, and we need them, to get them out of here and save them quick. And so I reached out to a guy who had 2 or 3 houses, and they were empty. His wife had just passed away a year prior, and he was just brokenhearted, and he would allow us to go over there and get pots and pans and different things because they had, 3 houses full of stuff. And so I'd go over there and collect things for girls who were moving out so they could have a little starter kit for their houses. And I said to him one day, and I went over there to pick up things before, and then I went back home, and I said, Scott, this is crazy. I am feeling like God impressed upon me to ask him about one of those houses for a recovery program. And we talked about it. We prayed about it. He thought it was a good idea. I went to Rick McClung, my boss at First Baptist Church. I just sought wise counsel, and everyone was going, yes, ask. So I was like, okay. So I went back to him, and I said, you will not believe this. I said, and he really didn't even know me that well. He just saw the ministry I had done. He had come to tour and that kind of thing. And I said, this is going to sound crazy to you, but I feel like the Lord is asking me to ask you that, would you mind doing a faith-based recovery program inside one of these houses? I said, and I already have the name of the house, because his name was Nick Humble, and his wife's name was Ann Humble. They were married 50 years when she passed away, and he is head over heels in love with her still. And I said, we could call the house the Humble House, after Ann Humble. And his face just lit up. And he is not a believer, okay? And so you don't go in partnership with unbelievers. That wasn't even it at all. I was just, hey, can I use your house? Whatever. And we ended up meeting over this several times, and bottom line was the house was on a golf course, and they were about to sell the property, and no one else would buy a house on the golf course around a recovery program. So all those plans were like, well, we can't do that because it was empty and they were going to sell it. They were going to do this development. But he said, how about this? He said, how about we sell this property and the 6 acres around it for $1 million, and maybe we could use that to build a recovery program. There's a verse in the Bible that says that God stores up the riches of the ungodly to give them to the godly. And that is exactly what God has done in this man's heart. And really all he wants is to leave a legacy for his wife. And so so we named the 501c3 the Humble House. We still to this day have not gotten any money, from him. He's selling assets and that kind of thing. And so that's what we're going to use to eventually build the faith-based recovery program. So right now what happened was we were laid off, which was not a real reason. He wanted all the people out of there. Every one of the Panama City Rescue Mission people got laid off, and during COVID. And then he said no one can come back. And so I was sitting at home for 2 months, and Scott had posted on Facebook. He said, pray for Rachel and her staff. They've been let go, due to COVID. And our sheriff, Tommy Ford, had messaged me, and he said, Rachel, would you consider working with the girls inside the Bay County Jail? And I was like, wow, because I was already thinking, what am I going to do? You don't just go into ministry like that and then, start working at Holiday Inn again. Like, I would do, because the ministry is not the job title. The ministry is inside of us. The Bible says that once we've been reconciled to God, that God then gives us a ministry of reconciling the world to himself. And so every one of us are in ministry. When that title is no longer there, I am the title. I am a believer. And that's the ministry God has given to us, is to go into the world, and plead with them to be reconciled to God. We're to show them the way. And so the ministry was still with me, and I was still making phone calls, and, girls were calling, I was praying, but it was just a restful time. And that time when we were at Bethel, it was a very, very hard time. It was months of just crying out to God and fasting and praying and seeking his direction for what he wanted us to do. Because it wasn't just me. I had staff, and then I had the girls who were in the program that had been with us for a year. And so when he asked me to come work for him, I was like, absolutely. So I signed a 1-year contract, and my job at the Bay County Jail, even now, is the faith-based care coordinator. What God was doing was he knew through COVID all the volunteers couldn't go in. And so God had allowed me to go in because he cared about those inmates. I really believe he cared about them so much that he was going to provide a way for them to still continue to hear the gospel of Christ. And so I'm so grateful to God that he allowed me to be one of the ones to go in. And so I started discipleship classes with the girls where they have, if they sign up for our class, they have to sign a covenant that they'll, do all the work every day. They'll be in their Bibles. They won't get any DRs, And so they are doing their homework every day, and we're meeting once a week. And then I do these support group meetings on Wednesday. And these girls are growing because due to COVID, they aren't just getting arrested, going in 30 days, seeing the court, the judge, and getting out. They are having to sit in jail for like 6 months because of COVID, because the courts are shut down. And if you're waiting for trial, it's been over a year since they've been able to go to trial, which really has benefited the kingdom of God because their minds are getting cleared up from these drugs and they're really being discipled in the Bible. And I believe that when we look next year at the return rate, it's going to go down. And so that was my other job, was reentry. So I help the girls to find recovery programs or housing when they get out. And so as I was on this venture, kind of going out in the city looking for housing, remember I have my 501c3, but we're not doing anything with it. My plan was to build a recovery program in a couple of years with, Nick Humble's money and fundraising, because he said, I'll pay this amount, but you have to fundraise the rest of it, for me to do this. So that's what our goal was. We just start fundraising. And I met a guy in the community trying to find resources for our girls. And he said, hey, I've got 2 houses. I'm with the Fresh Start program. We can't go into the prisons. We have no way of vetting them in. So our houses are going empty. And I said, I would love to rent one of those houses from you. I happen to have my 501c3, and some donor support started coming in. And the girls in the jail were starting to go back to court. And so there were girls that are going, I need a place to stay. I want to stay sober. I want to continue going to church. We had nowhere to put them. And so we opened our first house in September. I held beds. Actually, we opened a little bit earlier than I think August. And I don't think we got anyone in until, I think we got our first girl maybe in September and the next girl in November. What I ended up doing was, I wasn't worried about filling the house. I was holding beds for the girls that I'd already been working with inside the Bay County Jail. So not just anyone can come to these houses. Only the girls that I see are already putting in the work. They're coming to the classes. They're dedicated to church. And when they get out, they get first pick of the beds. And so we opened this house, and it holds 6 girls and a house mom. And the lady who had left Bethel Village, that I'd actually raised up through, she was one of my first case management girls in that program. When she graduated, brought her on staff at Bethel Village. And so she's been with me for 6 years. And so she said, you know what, I'm in a place right now where I could move in and save up money to buy a house. So if you want me, you got me. So she is working a full-time job, but she is sitting at the house, she's at the house at night, helping to run the house. And so she's the house manager. So we have someone living there with the girls, holding them accountable. And the program is really awesome because of my story and what God has shown me in what it's going to take to help people in addiction, that not only do you just get clean and you start going to church, you need accountability. You need the church to come alongside you. I'm telling you, if you would have seen me the first day I walked out of that rehab, you may not have invited me in your church because I was rough. And I think that even myself sometimes have the tendency to look at people and go, okay, no. They obviously don't love God, so I'm not inviting them to my church or whatever. And this little Most Excellent Way ministry at First Baptist Church, we started fishing, going into the jails and into the places where people are broken and inviting them to come to church. And our ministry now, we run about 80 men and women in Sunday school on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock. And in our individual groups, I oversee the women in a Wednesday night group for a support group for drug and alcohol addiction. Rick oversees the men. After COVID, the numbers changed a little bit. But before COVID, he was running like 30, 40 guys, and we were running like 50, 60 girls. And so the ministry has really grown because when we go into the jail and we say, hey, this is the meetings that we have to offer on the outside, it gives them a place to come to, when they get out. The thing is, with me, when I first started going to First Baptist Church, I was still on house arrest. Okay, I had my little baby, single mom. My son was 7 years old. And they were inviting me to church, and he wanted me to join this college and career class. Okay. I was terrified because we were in a very small room with like 6 chairs and me, and I felt like a spotlight was on me, and I was waiting for someone to ask me about my college that I did not have or my career, which I absolutely did not have. Like, what are you going to say? Oh, I just got out of rehab a couple of weeks ago, and before that I was in jail, so that's awkward, okay? And so I felt like a fish out of water going to this church. What we ended up doing was creating a Sunday school class for Most Excellent Way Ministry, so that when they first come into the church, we introduce them to a smaller body with people that they can connect with. They can see they're just like them, and we get the mentors and that kind of thing. And then from there, they all move into the bigger body. All of us move into it together, so that it's a little bit easier to get them connected. And so what we're doing now, where we're at now, is God actually just shut the door to, we had a 12 to 14 person house that we were just about to open. We were getting the lease ready and all that, and God just shut the door on it. And my prayer is always, and I would ask you to pray for me and pray for my husband and I as we make these decisions, and pray for the ministry, is that I will stay so close to God that I will know what direction he's telling us to go. I do not want to make one single step that is not ordained by him. I want this to be his ministry. And then when things go wrong, I can say, this is your ministry. So, I mean, I don't know what you're going to do about it, but, this is on you, And there's just peace in knowing that he is in control, and that this is his baby. So I just want to be led by him in everything that we do. God shut that door, and it was probably a good thing, so he wanted me to focus, more on the ladies at the jail. But the next step that we are wanting to do is either A, open another transitional house, or B, go ahead and start fundraising for our program, our faith-based recovery program. So the faith-based recovery program, we want that to be a free program for women who cannot afford it. I believe in long programs. It's going to have to be 12 months at least, because that's where you see the most fruit. But in order to do that, we need donations from the community to come alongside of us and support us. And we've already partnered with Franklin County, where if they have any girls, that come through their jail or whatever that they need recovery, when we get our program up, we'd be happy to take them. We would love to partner with you guys in this church, since these small communities that don't have a lot of resources. I have cards on the back table that you can take your card. You can kind of look into our ministry. We have a letter that kind of describes what we're doing. The cool thing about this transitional house, we call it transitional recovery, because it's not just a transitional house where you just go and live, and it's not a full recovery program, because that takes a lot more time and effort that I can give right now because I'm still at the jail. What it is, it's transitional recovery. And when these women come in, they have, I had put on there 3 weeks to find a job, but really we let one girl go 2 months without finding a job because we wanted her to find a meaningful job. We're trying to get them set up for literally for the next step of their life. And so she found a job at a daycare. All the girls are working. We have one girl that's on disability, and she's the cook and the driver and that kind of thing. But they all have to work during the day, and then they all have to be home by 6 o'clock p.m. because we're trying to instill in them this is what family looks like. They all eat dinner at the table together. They cook a meal and they eat together. And then at 6:30, 7 o'clock, they have classes every single night. On Wednesday night, they have the Most Excellent Way at First Baptist Church, which is getting them connected to a church body. See, what a person in addiction, or a person that is just struggling with life, that are broken, that are hurt, they need a place to belong, and they need a place with accountability. And the church is what provided that. Even the women in our church who have never experienced addiction at all, they have been the greatest mentors we've ever had. Because, we almost get inundated with addiction being in these ministries, but when you see one of these women from the church that are just a good, godly woman walk beside another woman in addiction, or a woman who's just struggled with any life-dominating sin, man, that person, I remember looking at Vicky and the way she would carry her purse, and she would carry her purse on her arm like this. And so for years, guess how I carried my purse? I carried my purse like this because she carried her purse like that. And I would just imitate the things that I saw the godly women around me doing, and that helped me to know how to live like a godly woman, following, their direction. And so in closing, what I would really encourage you to do, there are people in this community who have struggled with addiction. With those people, you do have to use discernment. You don't want to be an enabler, because that's the worst thing you could do in an addiction, someone that's addicted. However, the best thing that you can do to someone who may not look like you, you may be a little afraid of them. I don't know. But invite them to church. Just invite them. Because had I not been invited to that church that day, I don't know where my life would be today. And what they did was they invited me in, and they accepted me just for who I was. And then they helped me to become the woman that is standing before you today. And if it had not been for my church, I don't know where I'd be today. Because remember, I told you the first time I was going to a church, but I was never connected with it. And so this time, God showed me that the importance of any kind of recovery at all is accountability and being a part of a body of believers. And that's what we offer at Humble House. It's not just a recovery program. It's not just, it's transitional housing where we are introducing them to a body of people so that when they get their own house, their lives are still, under accountability. They're going to church, and that makes the success rate of a program really, really high. And so I would just encourage you, the Bible says to be reconciled. Our job is reconciliation. And I, have girls that are just coming out of jail that have burdens for their friends. And I say, you don't have to know all the answers. You don't have to have the answers to any of this stuff. Just invite them to church and let God do the work that the Holy Spirit will do through his word in their life and through community. So I would encourage you, go out into your community and just invite somebody to church. If you know someone that is struggling, you're more than welcome to call me. We have, other resources for recovery programs in the area. I can kind of give you a step-by-step, steps to take, to help that person kind of come out of addiction. There are steps to take. And I would ask you, too, in closing, just to please pray for us. If this church just began to pray for the Humble House ministry, and that was, what you guys did for us, I'm telling you, that would be the greatest gift you could ever give to us, is to remember us in your prayers. And remember our girls that are, in the programs in your prayers, because they are fighting a spiritual war for their lives. And we need prayer support for that. And any other way of donating or anything, you're welcome to, take one of my cards and just check out the ministry. Pray about it and see where the Lord leads you. But thank you for letting me share. I want my story to be shared with people who, can look at my life and go, okay, if God can do that in her life, he can absolutely do that in my life. And the Bible says if you delight yourself in the Lord, he'll give you the desires of your heart. And I didn't even know what the Lord was going to do, but the desire in my heart was to start a faith-based program for the help families. And as I just went through life delighting myself in the Lord, he has ended up giving me the desires of my heart and fulfilling the promises that he had spoken to me, like that song had said. So thank you so much for letting me share.